And hello again, everybody. Welcome back to the Carolina Free Baptist Church. My name is John Savage. I am the pastor of the Carolina Free Baptist Church, and this is a video that I am entitling Torah Extras. These videos are associated with our year-long study, Keep This in Your Heart, 1 year through the Torah, and I wanted to have some extra videos here because I'm getting some questions regarding some of the things that we've been talking about in those Torah portions. And in fact, I want to address this first question. You see the title the title of this video clues you in on what we will be talking about. In summary, the question that was asked was, when did the Exodus happen? So this video is a little more informal than our devotionals, but I do have plenty of notes written down here on my teleprompter. When did the Exodus happen? And you remember in the first parsha in the book of Exodus, entitled Shemot, I said there were two groups of people. I said there was one group that believes the Exodus didn't happen at all, and there's another group who believes the Exodus happened, but they can't agree on when it happened. So when did the Exodus happen? Really, there are three major points of view. The first one I've already said. One group believes it didn't happen at all, so we're not going to talk about them. Let's talk about the other group, the group that believes it happened. When did it happen? There's two major points of view. One, it happened in the 13th century BC under the reign of Ramses II. Or the other group thinks it happened during the 15th century BC under the reign of either Thutmose III or Amenhotep III. Which, of course, leads to the question, how do you get those dates? How do they date the Exodus? Well, let's talk about the late group first, the 13th century. They date the Exodus according to some names mentioned. Exodus chapter 1, verse 11 mentions the cities of Pithom and Ramses. And for the 13th century group, the late date group, this demonstrates that the city of Ramses would not have been built before the reign of Ramses I. And given the time between the birth of Moses and the time of the Exodus, that would put the Exodus sometime during the reign of Ramses II. And as for the early date group, the 15th century group, they date that based on scientific calculations. We have Assyrian sources that tell us that during the reign of King Ashur-dan III, there was a total solar eclipse. Following solar eclipse patterns and working backwards, scientists deduced that this solar eclipse would have taken place on June the 15th, 763 BC. And from there, scholars simply just work backwards, figuring in the times of the Kingdom of Israel and the periods of the Judges. Scholars took all that information and set the time of the Exodus around the year 1446 BC. And again, there's a lot of disagreement between these two camps. One cannot say that a city would definitely have been called Ramses simply because the pharaoh was named Ramses. I mean, Ramses is not an unusual name in Egypt. And one cannot say that an absolute chronology of the ancient Near East is even possible, given the vast discrepancies in the measurements of time. For example, there was no such month as June in 763 BC. And there is another opinion, actually, on the date of the Exodus. This is a more recent opinion. This is a book by Dr. Stephen Collins called Let My People Go. And the subtitle is Using Historical Synchronisms to Identify the Pharaoh of the Exodus. And there's going to be some spoiler alerts here. Dr. Collins sets the date of the Exodus during the reign of Thutmose IV, which is in the 14th century BC. And it says he uses historical synchronisms. And what that means is it's an analysis of all of the circumstantial evidence from surrounding areas connected with Egypt to try to put together a picture of, is there an indication that the Exodus may have happened? For example, one of the historical synchronisms that Dr. Collins uses are a series of documents called the Amarna letters. These were letters that were found in a document vault in a city called El Amarna. It used to be the capital city of the pharaoh Akhenaten. And in these letters, we find that there are hints of vassal states of Egypt imploring Egyptian assistance against invaders, and hints of Egypt actually ignoring their pleas for either financial assistance or military intervention. Dr. Collins also mentions political changes that took place. There were the disappearance of certain Egyptian vassal states. There were the rise of other Egyptian enemy states. We know, for example, that there was a kingdom called Mari in northern Syria, which was in strong alliance with Egypt, and it was overrun by the Hittites in modern-day Turkey. And this led eventually to Egypt being pressured into an alliance with the Hittites. And the book that Dr. Collins writes kind of centers around one major question, and that is, how can one explain why Egypt, which held political and military dominance from the Nile to the Euphrates, including the eastern coast of the Mediterranean, why would they ignore pleas for military intervention and for financial assistance when it would have been in their best interests to do so, both for their continued military dominance and for their continued financial development? Well, the answer is there really is only one single document that we currently know of that explains why Egypt would have refused help, why Egypt would have declined in power and influence, even though there should have been no reason for that to occur. And that one document that we have is the Torah, which, as you can guess, makes all of this very difficult. We have literally found no other source which makes any reference to any specific series of catastrophes in Egypt leading to the destruction of agriculture, the failure of the Egyptian economy, the collapse of the Egyptian military, and the decimation of the population. There are general circumstantial pieces of evidence, but there's nothing specific. Compounding this is the fact that we know that Egyptians were prone to destroying their own historical records. The Queen Hatshepsut, who reigned during the 18th dynasty, she was almost lost to history completely because people devoted to her successor wanted to erase her from history. So monuments have actually been found with her name gouged off. And it was through careful archaeological work that her name was found and her place in history restored. Well, anyway, the point is this. Who knows if we will one day read about an Egyptian monument that archaeologists reconstruct that details catastrophes that certain officials wanted to erase from Egypt's history. Who knows if one day we'll find correspondence between two officials mentioning the seemingly supernatural disasters that Egypt had endured. Until then, really the Torah is all we have. It's the only document that gives any account of the Exodus at all. Now, I've structured the Keep This in Your Heart video series around my personal convictions that the events of the Torah actually took place. Yes, there are difficulties, but just because we don't have complete answers now doesn't mean that we won't have complete answers in the future. And some compelling evidence exists. We'll Simply have to wait and see what happens. Well, that's the long answer. When did the Exodus happen? Assuming that it did happen, you got three choices. You have the late date, which is the 13th century BC under the reign of Ramses II. You have the early date, the 15th century BC under the reign of either Thutmose III or Amenhotep III, or you have Dr. Collins' view, which took place in the 14th century BC under the reign of Thutmose IV. Have fun wrapping your brain around that. Take your pick, whichever evidence you're going for. Make sure you study, make sure you look carefully, and make sure that we're not just being dogmatic in our assertions, but let us look carefully at the evidence that we have. It does exist. We do have some of it. And that's it. That's that question. We'll do more of these videos as more questions come in. And thank you very much for continuing to watch this series and for watching this video. I appreciate it. May the Lord bless you.